This video stems from a quest to find an answer. And the question is, if it wasn't for id Software, would anyone remember Softdisk publishing? If you've ever heard of Softdisk, it's almost surely as the company where the id guys met. After moonlighting for a while, they split off and made their own massive fortunes. For most people, especially journos, this is where the story ends. What have I told you? That a different story was hidden in plain sight this entire time. Let me take you on a journey. Before they were household names, the id people made a whole ton of software, and a chunk of that was within the hot and humid walls of Softdisk, which is extensively described in the first few chapters of Kushner's seminal Masters of Doom. For Kushner, Softdisk's involvement ends when the newly formed team ditches the company and ties some loose ends. Today I'll try, to the best of my ability, to tell you the other story and explore what most have skipped. Which won't be easy, since it's much easier to find the software than info on the company. You know it's a joke when there's little info. Some of it claims the company still exists, and other cites Wikipedia, openly or just lifts without credit. Wikipedia references Kushner's book, and Kushner shifts focus from Softdisk around the time id Software takes its form. If you were to treat Kushner's book as your only source of info about Softdisk, chances are you came away with the impression that this company was exclusively a loser in that they literally had id Software on payroll and made little use of their skills. But let's start from the beginning. I want to cast your mind to a different era, when software would be delivered via mail order. Anecdotally, I've seen a fair share of retro PC builds, and not once anyone did that to run Softdisk's wares. I needed to do more digging. In my research, there were little to no mentions of Softdisk, and as it so happens, reliably, when someone mentioned them, usually we'd see a mention about id as well. Like an omen, the shadow of id would follow. The epitome of this must be Giant Bomb, where you go to related pages and under loyal employees, the first people listed are Romero and Carmack, which is hilarious if you know the story how they developed their own games on the company's computers. I go into details in the deep dive I made about Doom. Even the Weird Orchard people were not especially raving about the publisher. At this point, my quest seemed complete. But little did I know, this was merely the first one in a chain. The next major question was, is this absence from the general memory warranted? Imagine, if you will, a coffee shop, known for its coffee and cake. But some of the chefs and baristas want more, and eventually they quit while forming their own business and open up shop just down the street. A century later, no one remembers that first cafe because it had coffee and cake. The only reason it's mentioned at all is because all those culinary pros met and used to work there. Is Softdisk such a cafe? Is their only claim to fame the fact that this is where id Software formed? How can a company that at some point employed more than 100 people, had 100,000 subscribers, and made literal millions could just vanish from the collective memory up to a point where even the fructose people barely mention its existence? The year is 1981, and a man by the name of Jim Mangum founds the company in Shreveport, Louisiana. A year later, one of our main characters, Al Vacavius, joins the business. In 1983, Mangum and Vacavius quit their jobs at Louisiana State University to work full-time on Softdisk. What's remarkable about Softdisk is that it's one of the first digital magazines ever, being beaten by perhaps only C-Load for the TRS-80. Apart from the Apple II publication, we also have a C64 one called Lodestar. Let's focus on Al. Don't worry, I'm not here to compensate for my own failures and shortcomings as a person by shitting on the hard work of some dude I never met and veiling it thinly as critique or comedy. I want to give the guy a fair shake. He had the balls to quit his day job and build one of, if not the, most successful companies of its kind.
By any measure, Al Vakovius' Softdisk publishing company is doing quite well. Softdisk took in $10 million last year. That's not bad for a Shreveport company, which most of us haven't even heard about.
And really felt the Apple II zeitgeist. But we're not talking about whatever the weird orchard people were smoking in the late 70s, early 80s. We're talking about the late 80s, early 90s, and the PC, cold and soulless, just like Big Blue itself. And now, the main focus for today, Big Blue Disk for the PC. Time to finally tell you how I'm gonna slice this cake in a way that hopefully protects whatever's left of my fleeting sanity. 1. I'll discuss the PC publications only. 2. Some periods will get skipped entirely. 3. Others will be looked at in greater or smaller detail. You'll see when we get there. 4. I'll do my best not to rage on the devs, and 5. I'll try to judge the software within the context of the era. So I'm not gonna piss on those utilities for being basic and whatnot. This is also not an in-depth review, more of an overview. Instead of splitting hair on each program, we're trying to understand Big Blue Disk as a whole. I'm not even trying to cover everything, it's just not possible, but I'll give you the highlights. We begin with issue 1, which is important for a plethora of reasons other than it being the premier issue, and most of those reasons are not immediately obvious. Issue 1 resembles in structure its Apple II analog. I think we should take a finer look, seeing how it would become the template all the other would follow rather closely. I assumed Softdisk was eons behind the times and totally out of touch with the PC, but as it turns out, they were pretty progressive in some areas. Like here, they mentioned their BBS and they're asking people to send them feedback. The company is trying to have more than just a customer base. They want to have a community, which is in line with them being a digital magazine and not just some catalog publisher. Speaking of a community, let's see some nuggets from that BBS. Here, someone is discussing UFOs, astral projection, spontaneous combustion, and dinosaurs in lakes? And right below, someone is looking for a C compiler and is asking for recommendations. Drink it in. User mail is not the only example of this publication being self-documenting. Each program has a bunch of supporting text going over the features of the software. We, however, can use this as a peek into the minds behind the publication and as a time capsule. Later on we'll see better examples, because this loan amortization program is probably as relevant today as it was back then. When I first encountered the requests for feedback, I quickly assumed they were just your typical corporate BS. But after learning that Softdisk was doing this from the very start, asking Apple II users to return disks and give feedback, I changed my mind. So I'm gonna say Al was serious about this. Speaking of serious, check out this almost manifesto by the editor, Daniel Tobias. They're targeting users they feel are being neglected by other publications, home users, teachers, and computer geeks, as well as small businesses. Imagine it's 1990. Imagine you're a freshly minted PC user. Imagine you're like woof woof. Oh damn, did I break it? Being a beginner computer user in the 90s is a daunting task, but worry not. Softdisk has you covered. Woof Woof just bought a PC and decided to throw in a Softdisk subscription for good measure. This is gonna take a while. I need to piss. Time for us to finally bite into what Softdisk has to offer. We're skipping 3 years. Imagine you're making a blueberry cake and you grab the ingredients from random places. That's Big Blue Disk in its earliest years. Softdisk is publishing software submitted from all sorts of random people, and this is where a certain John Romero makes an entry. Together with coder and business partner Lane Rove, he joins Softdisk in 1989 in hopes of making huge and bombastic video games. The team offers a game titled Zaporoids, which gets published in issue 36. Romero even contributes the odd little review. Despite initial promises from Al, the game side is not working out and Romero is forced to churn out various utilities. The manifesto of stuff from issue 1 is in full effect. Most programs on offer don't warrant a full examination, but the ones that do make up for it easily. You'll see. Utilities, puzzles, business software, and simple games. Quite a few, in fact. Do I even have a hard drive? Oh, okay. Wait, what are megabytes? A lot of the software can be run directly from the floppy, saving you some of that precious disk space. And if you enjoy the software, you can install it. This formula would stay more or less the same, despite the visual changes for many, many years to come. We get a bunch of clip art for print shop. Get used to seeing those. And to truly drive home how much Big Blue Disk is a product of its time, here's Jacket, a utility that allows you to list the contents of a disk, so you can print that on the sleeve. And it crashes. Did I mention MS-DOS can be really unstable? MS-DOS can be really unstable. Speaking of DOSisms and ancient problems, here's a utility that allows you to split your files between floppies in the most space-efficient way. Let's play something that's not a fruit machine. This one actually sounds pretty interesting. A fantasy murder mystery where your job is to find out who killed the king. And now, here's something by Romero. It's not a game, and that's pretty much my point. It's bizarre to see his name next to some random utility. But let's try an actual game. Kids cards. Remember, it's the 90s. We're spelling with a K. Cool little time waster. And I lose. Slapjack? This doesn't sound appropriate for children, so next. Abstract art looks trippy as all balls, and that's enough to warrant it being mentioned. You may wanna slow it down with the included speed break. And now, despite some of the vitriol you're gonna hear from me later on, I need to mention that Softdisk has some truly useful and wholesome stuff. Case in point, this coloring book. A parent might give this to their kid, further driving home that Big Blue Disk has something for everyone. And now for some action, Pyramids of Egypt, something made by Romero that isn't a file utility. You collect gems while avoiding cobras in search of an exit. Whoa! Guts! It's this game that catches the attention of one Scott Miller, who, wouldn't you know it, makes an appearance on the very next issue, and he has a much bigger role to play in our story. For now, however, he's the proud author of Castle of Cross. If you're wondering where in this whole thing is John Carmack, worry not, since he joins us with an RPG. Titled Dark Designs appears in issue 52. Thanks to Romero's pushing, Softdisk eventually starts working on another publication, Gamer's Edge. In issue 53, we get what would become a somewhat regular edition, an indexing program. It stores data on all past issues and allows you to add new entries for fast retrieval. It's like a miniature search engine for your software, which is pretty cool. What's arguably less cool is that about half of that would be clip art. Okay, maybe not half, but sometimes that's how it feels. By this point, you should have a decent feeling for the types of wares that Softdisk has in its library, and most of that is targeting lower or even lowest spec'd systems. The sales pitch is as follows. You buy a computer and want to squeeze as much as you can from it. We're gonna see how this philosophy may extend to you as a subscriber, and the devs responsible for making your software. As you can suspect from all of this, there's a massive chasm between Al and the incubating It Boys, especially Romero. Like that time he wants to learn C and he gets pushback because the other coders don't know the language. This opposition towards upping their own games is ridiculous. It's not like they're a software company or something. It is at this point when id breaks off from Softdisk, to an extent. As it turns out, they'd still have a role to play here due to them moonlighting and now being contracted to offset this stunt. Losing top coders is tough shit enough, but this would not be the last of Softdisk's problems. How can you tell a company is getting desperate? If in the early 90s they're trying to convince their users not to abandon antiquated 70s tech, which what the Apple II is at this point. According to Kushner, Softdisk has a massive snafu on their hands by betting too much on the Apple II, and I'm guessing that means overhiring and probably opportunity cost. This introduces us to the forces that Softdisk is up against in the marketplace. Let's start with the big silicon monster, the PC and its clones. The PC is an anomaly that hurts Softdisk in two ways. While not the sole reason for the demise of the C64 and Apple II, it's not helping by offering 16 and then 32-bit computing that's getting cheaper by the week. A less obvious problem is that the cloners, by dethroning IBM and offering their own builds, massively fragment the market. All PCs are similar, but differ in more or less subtle ways. Tandy, for instance, has its pseudo-standard color mode. What you see here is a combinatronic explosion, and Softdisk is feeling the fallout hard. This is where Romero's comment about the lowest common denominator starts making more sense. Softdisk cannot afford to lose this market. Speaking of losing the PC market, let's mention again the idiotic bureaucratic menace that since time immemorial is known as Big Blue, and after years of not caring that other companies are riffing on that name, suddenly starts caring, which for the likes of Softdisk means legal threats. You're gonna find conflicting info about this, but according to issue 37, the sore losers of Big Blue finally get lost. Softdisk later changes the name of the publication to OnDisk Monthly, and that supposedly is not forced by the debacle. The neighbor told me about this thing called shareware. You get software for free and pay if you want to register. But I need to plug myself to a BBS or some shit. Looks like Woof Woof is about to discover the intoxicating world of shareware, which for Softdisk is a major ass pain. As early as issue 1, they post an open call to interested developers with an offer to publish their software. Like here in this section called Harvest. Get used to seeing weird names like this. By 1990, shareware is an established and constantly growing business model, with independent developers from all around the world offering their wares. The quality, of course, varies greatly, but once you land on that one utility that solves your problem, do you really need others? You're supposed to pay for that, but by definition, no one really polices this. All you need is a phone line and a modem so you can connect to a bunch of BBSs. And if you can get that up and running for some reason, there are compilations and catalogs that save you the wait time and probably a decent piece of your phone bill. I think you're starting to understand how this is an existential threat to Softdisk. To add insult to injury, Scott Miller offers his cross games as shareware, which is possible since Softdisk doesn't own exclusivity. And on top of that insult, Miller's company, Apogee, publishes Commander Keen, also as shareware. But it's not just about a few games and the odd utility. Shareware as a phenomenon has all the means to kick Softdisk in that blue ball of theirs. When you're a solo dev working from your bedroom or shed, you don't pay all the costs that Softdisk has to, like for an office. Distribution costs? What's that? Your wares spread through BBSs and compilations. Package size? Even if you get over that 144 meg, BBSs aren't picky about a few bytes. And if someone slaps that sucker on a compilation CD, they won't even notice those few extra bytes. Or megs. The only cost you pay is when you ship the documentation and other goodies. But at that point, you have your profit already. Shareware hurts also because devs now have a third option, outside of negotiating with Softdisk or a box publisher. And that's a serious burn since Softdisk is constantly hungry for more content, and is also incapable of producing the same quality wares as a solo dev who's working on a piece of software for half a year or more. You can win with one developer, but how do you fight an entire paradigm? The grab bag is getting empty, and Softdisk HQ is under siege, with enemies bold and brazen. One way to solve this is by porting first-party software from other publications. Take a look at Paragon, ported from the C64, an engaging ballgame requiring observation and timing. This doesn't solve the hiring problem, however. Not many skilled coders are willing to move to Shreveport to work full-time. Shareware, meanwhile, is so big, we see the company flirt with the idea in issue 84. They announced 2 new offerings made of shareware and other free software. One such program is included on the issue. People are asked to pay a registration fee on top of a subscription, and that goes not great. Reactions are mixed, and we never see the shareware spotlight featured again. They hype it in the shop, but traces of this thing just peter out. I assume it limps on for a while and then dies. What's worse are the limitations of a typical floppy disk. I'll discuss this a bit more later on, but for now, let's just hint that your floppy, despite its name, won't stretch. Suffice to say, things ain't looking great. And what's the response to this onslaught? It's gonna surprise you, so fasten your seatbelts. We're going on an emotional ride through Softdisk's adventures in technology. This looks meh. What year even is this? Let's take a look at issues 1 and 60 side by side. Even though they're separated by about 5 years, it's hard to tell that. Things, however, start to improve with the revolutionary issue 61. As promised by Jay Wilbur, we get much better graphics, EGA, with support for VGA cards. Let's take a moment to appreciate the cool animations. Everything is clean, concise, nicely laid out. You have subtle design hints like the arrows here telling you how to navigate. There's a shallow yet effective hierarchy to keep all the items grouped. This is such a step up. Great work overall. In issue 63, we have an educational program, Drugs in You, which aims to warn you about the results of taking alcohol and other dangerous substances. Seeing how Jay has a hand in this, I'm gonna say he's the unsung hero here. Not just because he'd be grilling ribs for the rest of id soon after. For now, however, Battlestar is a decent take on Battleship, but with multiple weapons. And Computer Ease is a fun PC knowledge quiz that is done in the style of a TV quiz show. Fitness in You is an educational program that discusses nutrition and training. I can't comment on the accuracy of the information, but the program lists its sources, so looks like the team behind this did their homework. There's even a cookbook where you add your own recipes. Don't let the words online confuse you. This software is not connected to anything. From what I gather, Softdisk means by this that something is digital or on disk. The only letdown is the lack of a meal journal. Speaking of letdowns, the dark times. Have you ever wanted to boop someone in the crotch with your accelerated fist? This screen has so many problems and all of them baffling. I'll break it down for you. 1. Aggressive blue. 2. Lower resolution text and general ugliness. 3. Let's play a game. Down, 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 down. Down, down, right, 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 right. Right, 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 right. Escape. Yeah, this is bullshit. 4. Ads. Yes, after you exit a program, the shell displays an ad for whatever they're selling that month. If you put more exclamation marks, I may buy one of your quickly aging games. Even though I paid nothing for this abandonware, I cannot help but feel angry and disappointed. So much for attractive and easier to use. Yeah, we get a new editor. Sorry, Director of Product Development. Starting your tenure with a bucket of bullshit is not how you make friends. Or happy customers, Rhonda. Seems Jay Wilbur and Kevin Cloud are no longer on board this sinking ship, and there's less people on staff overall. My diagnosis? Frustration. In the next issue, they deliver a menu that isn't brain dead. They want to make things better. Better for who, you may ask? Allow me to introduce you to the Laggard Legion. There is a concept known as the adoption bell curve, and if you've ever heard the term early adopter, that's where it comes from. A laggard is the opposite. There's not much inherently wrong in being a laggard. That depends on what we're talking about. Not every machine needs the latest and greatest, but choices have consequences. The breakthrough issue 61 has an important feature that addresses this exact problem, the fallback. If your graphics adapter is ancient, the shell will detect that and gracefully degrade from EGA to CGA. The later Blue UI does the same thing. They even give you instructions in case you have a quirky setup. So if the Laggard Legion is seemingly catered to, why make the change? Is this about video? Video seems to be a huge topic, constantly coming up in the mail. Here they admit that 80% of the user base already has this techno-wizardry VGA thing, which means they're letting down 80% of their customers. And this is not long after that Blue travesty happened. The issue is not just about compatibility. Size matters. Remember how floppies don't stretch? Better graphics eat more space. They cannot spare 40K to add a built-in text editor, so forget about fancy VGA graphics. And in issue 69, we have an explanation of the video debacle. The way I see it, first the company goes overboard with the presentation and pisses people off, then switches to a now third menu system at the cost of clinging to old graphics, and pisses people off. Although apparently many users are happy with this move, which raises further questions about silent majorities and the survivor bias. Issue 71 is notorious for its extra special editorial. Those editorials can get pretty corny, but never before outright cringe. And the menu is still pushing shitty ads. Now you can skip them, which is yet another confusing half measure. All of this verbiage and screaming that this is your disk just shows desperation. That being said, licensing Dilbert is pretty awesome. What about the software? An absolute highlight of this entire period is Science, an educational game about road safety, which has the most hilarious quiz ever. You got them all, with only 13 mistakes. Please don't drive. Press escape to continue. Message Center is wasting more of your precious RAM in exchange for the privilege of being able to take notes during a phone call. The only issue is that your average PC user of the 90s has a notepad and something to write with next to their machine. Not to mention that the free form of handwriting is better suited to a spontaneous call, and you can make duels when someone starts to get boring. I don't see this being that useful outside of a call center, and I can't imagine many small businesses having a use case for this boring program. Speaking of boring, another TSR, ResiCalc. On the surface, there's nothing wrong, but once again we have to cast our minds into the dark and magical butthole of 90s DOS computing. By running this software, you're using your modern programmable calculator to emulate a relatively cheap plastic desk calculator, and I don't see an option to copy the output elsewhere, which is par for the course for DOS. So you might as well use that desk calculator. I'm questioning the utility of this utility software, which is where I have to mention issue 81. You get this coupon organizer, which to me is rock bottom, prime shovelware, a solution in search of a problem. Because needing a database for your coupons is something that only the most micro of managing soccer moms would ever consider using. Everyone else uses, oh, I don't know, an envelope or a fridge magnet. And yet it is this issue when the company hints at something. They urge people to upgrade. 2 months later, they deliver a massive overhaul, a full VGA upgrade. And to keep the laggards happy, now instead of a fallback, there's a separate legacy edition. This new UX comes at the cost of increasing the space requirements to 1.2 megabyte disks. But it's worth it. I really dig this dithering on the graphics. And the response is overwhelmingly positive. That's not the only upgrade. We now have a new PM, Sean Golden. I already like Sean because instead of begging people to keep subscribed, he takes the problems head on. Example? Windows content. Windows stuff is already appearing on the disk for a few months now, And it's a divisive one. Hardcore DOS users don't want any of that Windows crap taking space on their publication, while others welcome it. And after giving their feedback, they get an exclusive publication, Softdisk for Windows. It's around this time the publisher starts or restarts researching sound support. The software is still a mixed bag. Storyteller is a tool for generating your own stories based on canned scenarios, whereas Halloween Hijinks is a slow and cumbersome reskin of a different slow and cumbersome game, where you do half steps instead of full steps, and this makes movement a chore. But nothing beats Bubba, who makes his debut in issue 88. This one is so unique, it's getting a special dissection later on. Issue 91 brings yet another name change, Softdisk PC, to put this publication in line with the naming of the others. Speaking of refreshing things, this puzzle game is our intro to what the company calls the framework, and is a second attempt, an honest one I might add, to finally unify all the products in terms of UX. New software starts with this and older gets it during an update. Finally, we get some more consistency and that desperately needed sheen of quality. This is a company finally pulling its head from the crapper and starting to fight for the customer experience. I honestly forgot DOS software could do menus like that. It's an obvious Windows influence, but truly welcome. They also introduced the universal data format so that content, like a set of puzzles made for one platform, can work on a different one. They still have to port the engine, but any help is welcome when dealing with so many publications. Issue 100 is an opportunity to reminisce about the past and celebrate a little. Important changes are right around the corner. All of this looks like some empire renovating itself by finally paying attention to what matters and making bold moves in the right direction. This rise, however, turns out to be the beginning of the end. For now, we get new levels for Paragon, which is welcomed, since it's a dope game. In issue 105, another upgrade, themed backgrounds. They add some flair and flavor to each issue. All of the money you're paying for that sub is getting you something cool, right? Fonts sometimes get those little previews, so you know what to expect, making the user experience better. We get a rather prophetic discussion about floppies being outdated, which leads me to what I've dubbed the compression controversy. Subscribers are used to opening files and running software right from the floppy, but with the increasing file sizes, the company starts to compress the data, requiring users to dedicate some hard drive space for the files, and many people are making a sting about this. The company addresses this by allowing people to install the issues onto a hard drive, and then split them into a bunch of floppies, which will satisfy subscribers who are into floppy masochism, I guess. More changes are promised to improve the usability while trying to cram as much data as possible. Shortly after, we get something pretty cool. They release a program called Football Companion, and it has the ability to get updates via FTP. They announced the opening of an online store on the World Wide Web to complement the ones they have with the likes of Prodigy and AOL. Softdisk introduces the concept of a starter disk, with the most common files to reduce the duplication of data between issues. They even discuss making the jump to CDs and start to hype the new release medium. Issue 116 sees them post this rather desperate 10 reasons why Softdisk is awesome list in the editorial. But on the bright side, it's our old friend Paragon. Let's play some. I think this is appropriate. Finally, we reach issue 117. This issue, despite not being remarkable, is still important. Can you guess why? No, it's not the fireworks greeting us. It's less about the issue itself and more about what's not in the issue. Can you guess what major game came out the same year? If you said Doom, nope. I am shitting you not. Fine, I'll build that Pentium PC. Quake was the eldritch horror that changed gaming forever and the PC industry with it. which is why I consider this moment appropriate to begin judgment proper. In the same year, 3D Realms would give us Duke 3D, and id would release Quake. Softdisk graced us with programmer art orcs. Despite having a community, they took ages to act upon upgrade requests. The doctrine of cheapness and the mandate of releases reigned supreme. They put themselves on a treadmill of their own design, and that worked fine and dandy for the C64 and Apple II, stable platforms that commercially lived ages. But in the wild west of the PC, things were moving fast, and Softdisk wasn't handling the rodeo. In the DOS era, you could shit out simple games and utilities in a month, especially when CGA was still the norm. But come EGA, VGA, and Windows 3X, complexity, dev time, and with that, costs would only go up. In the game I just showed, Vorterra, I see the first monster and I run away from my computer. Now look at Alien Rampage, same year and it's leagues better. Maybe because this was only published by Softdisk, but made by an actual game studio. I feel sorry for the Vorterra guy. I wouldn't be surprised if he had a month or two of a deadline, just like Romero back in the days of Dangerous Dave. Speaking of, just like he'd write reviews about noteworthy video games for Softdisk. Now someone else wrote a review of Doom. At that point, Softdisk gave us some more puzzles and another Bubba game. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten about you, although I wish I had. Fast forward to 1996, and people were happily jibbing zombies and dancing around shamblers, deathmatching all day and night. Doom was a distant memory by that point, completely eclipsed by its successor. In issue 105, they raised the minimum CPU requirements to a 386. That was in 1995. Its predecessor, the 286, came out in 1982, and by 1992 was in bargain bin computers alongside the 144 meg floppy disk drive, which is an excellent moment to open that can of worms. In 1993, the publisher upgraded the floppies from a poor man's 720K to a massive, dick-extending 1.2 megs. In 1993, the same year CDs started invading, and the last surviving 5.25-inch floppy drives were finally being removed in favor of CD-ROM drives. Hell, Jay mentioned in an editorial that in 1991 CD drive prices finally became passable for normal people. And yet Softdisk needed 5 goddamn years to finally make the decision to offer CDs, which was a breath of fresh air and allowed them to include bigger graphics. Oh yeah, the graphics debacle of issues 61 and 67. The way I see it, the loud minority complained, as loud minorities often do, and the top brass caved in. So we suddenly had an interface upgrade with Rhonda in charge, complete with cringe-worthy editorials. This spring, don't let yourself be lured away from your computer by the promise of an exciting doubleheader. What, you ask, can compete? The answer: OnDisk Monthly. Instead of panicking and backpedaling, thus pissing off a lot of people, Softdisk could have dialed down the bling in the main edition and offered a secondary Legacy edition, and actually doing that took them 16 months. Instead, they replaced the new presentation system, spearheaded by Jay Wilbur, with a buggy, ugly shell which displayed ads. Jay may have went too far with the animations, but still. Looks like they were trying to have the cookie and eat the cookie, retaining laggard users and appeasing the rest, while financing only one publication. Judging from the aforementioned tone of distress from Rhonda, I guess this was a disaster. In 1993, the new editor straight up admitted that they took way too long to update and announced the split of the product into 2 flavors. Those would now coexist, and you could pick whatever you needed, CGA or VGA. In issue 66, they ran a hardware survey, and the results were clear. Over 80% of people had VGA or better graphics. And by issue 73, half a year later, they were still unsure what to do. Rolling out a VGA version happened in issue 83, so that's almost a year and a half after they had the data, In the computer industry, that amount of time is a small eternity. Nowadays, PC tech has plateaued. You can play a modern adjacent game on maybe not a potato, more like a cabbage. You can buy a used computer from a thrift store or eBay, clean up that sucker a little, and boom, you can play a ton of games. With some compromises, but still. Throw in a cheap upgrade and double boom, you have less compromises. In the 90s though, your PC was already outdated by the time you were finished setting it up. Meanwhile, Shreveport HQ was busy asking themselves hardcore philosophical questions. What's the meaning of life? What's the purpose of the universe? Does God exist? Should we support Windows? Oh yeah, let's talk about that. It took them 4 years to finally roll out a Windows-specific publication, as if DOS would live on forever. And this is where we reach the final chapters of our story. From this point onward, I'll be jumping a lot, in yearly increments in fact, both for the sake of brevity and my own sanity. The 10-year anniversary issue introduced the CD flavor as an option, featuring a better back issue browser and intro movies. We'll look at those later. Softdisk announced going into the retail business with software on CD, although I'd say 1996 was a bit late for that. The Network Corner discussed how domains work, as well as free speech and censoring Wolf3D. Issue 132 was honestly just more of the same. Nothing truly stands out. This or my brain just shut down, buried in shovelware. No, wait, the worst looking Senate game I've ever seen. Oh, and SVGA support. And then issue 141 marked the end of the line. One last farewell from the editor, recounting the lore, but not mentioning how slow Softdisk was in doing upgrades. We got Football Companion and a handful of lame jokes. And a genuinely wholesome game where you gather edible mushrooms while avoiding the toxic ones, as well as obstacles. In a way, it summarizes the publication. Baskets of random stuff where the mushroom picker would do their best to find decent software, dodging more and more problems, while running on a never-ending treadmill of technological progress, moving in a sluggish and unresponsive way. Despite me enjoying the cute idea, I have to mention this game came out in 1991 in the Soviet Union, which perhaps shows how desperate Softdisk was for content. This was not the end though. Softdisk for Windows, which spun from the main publication, outlived the DOS original, but not by a huge margin. Initially there was overlap, but eventually the DOS people got their toys and Windows users got theirs. I went over this publication in yearly increments, and the image that emerged was pretty much more of the same, but with a GUI. For instance, Win2Do loaded data from the previous version, so you could just upgrade to the newer subscription and continue that way. A bunch of titles were in fact ports from DOS. And to aid people new to Windows, they offered a column with help and tips. Seeing how this was the rise of the World Wide Web, there was a bunch of content about the subject, the technology, business, and even political drama like censorship. This overlaps with the DOS edition. Which is where I'm gonna mention possibly the last true leap that the publication made. The HTML shell. Yes, since issue 48 you needed a web browser, and the issues were HTML pages. So I installed Netscape 408 and dove right in. The early web, untamed, so raw. And in this case running from a local disk, so not exactly the web, but you get the idea. Oh, and frames. There's a reason we no longer use that shit. As promised, I'll show you an intro movie, here from issue 50, the last one preserved. It's glorious. What's less glorious is their first and proud Java game. A Java game for Windows 95? Yeah, I'll pass. Just like I'll pass playing for any longer this air hockey game. After Quake, even shovelware had to upgrade to 3D. Although judging by how the objects overlap and glitch, those may just be sprites of 3D models. And the field is making the goal and middle off-center. And this is version 2! I don't even want to know how version 1 looked or played. I had a look at a snapshot advertising the lost issues, and from what I saw, it was more of the same. Shame, however, that I won't get to read the final editorial. Their last products included the likes of Screensaver Studio, which a demo of was included in one of the issues, and despite it looking somewhat like a video editor, I just couldn't figure it out. At that point, my brain was no longer braining. They introduced the ability to send your feedback forms via email, which is awfully late, seeing how they kept discussing the web for a long while at that point and actively used it to connect with customers. And this last preserved mailbag, just months before the zine's death, in the same year the next major version of Windows launched, the same year Half-Life came out, the year of our mistress, 1998, this dude was pestering the staff about the inclusion of too many Windows 95 exclusive titles on his Windows subscription disk, and the editor had to patiently explain to him the gist of the problem. Truly, the laggard legion dies hard, if ever. Time to wrap this up. In this broken snapshot of a now dead digital storefront, we see a financial application, Loan Accelerator, of a humble asking price of $9.95. The software doesn't run on Windows Vista, which means it's probably 16-bit. This means that years after the fact, someone went in and changed the description for this uncelebrated, antiquated piece of financial software, which seems oddly fitting. Loan Accelerator for Windows was an updated version of Loan Accelerator 3.0, which was an update of Plus 2.0, which was an update of the original, and that was based on loan amortization, made by Big Al for issue 1 of Big Blue Disk. The disk has truly spun full circle. My opinion of Softdisk has changed over the course of this journey, and I hope yours did as well. I came here expecting that Softdisk probably would be forgotten completely if it wasn't for id, and that proved to be mostly true. This seems to be one of the costs of the laggard strat. Since Softdisk publishing played it so safe for the majority of its existence, there are no real standouts, with the exception of the id stuff, which was age-old by the time the company stopped publishing altogether. I've heard of Alien Rampage, but had no idea it was connected to Softdisk, until now. From Kushner, we know Al was pushing the future id people to produce games at an unrealistic pace. After they left, and they fulfilled their obligations, the output of the Gamer's Edge publication went seriously down. I've managed to find only a few non-id games published under this brand. The company also had a similar idea with DT Publisher and the PC Business Disk. DT Publisher? Gone and forgotten. I know it existed only because it was mentioned in an editorial. The PC Business Disk met a similar fate. Those are the issues that I know existed, since they're mentioned in the database. 8 confirmed issues. I couldn't find even one archive copy of this thing. I did find a filing about the name being trademarked, and the trademark expiring about a year later. Looks like it died on its ass, hard. And I think I know why. If you're a serious biz person, who do you trust to help you run your business? The people who made that one odd spreadsheet? Or the Lotus Corporation? Just like if you're a gamer, who will you give your money to? The brilliant minds behind Vorterra, or the people who made Doom and Quake? Companies like Lotus and id would produce a limited number of things at a time and invest their effort to refine those things over multiple iterations and years. Comparing Softdisk to id may be a little unfair, so let's use another comparison. Broderbund, the company which released PrintShop, for which Softdisk kept releasing clip art of questionable quality. I think nothing highlights the massive rift in mentality between the two better than this quote from a Broderbund co-founder. Every year you had to have, I don't know, we put out, in terms of totally original products, not ports, not derivatives, not follow-on products, probably no more than 7 to 10 products a year. So it wasn't a huge number. We had a process of looking at submissions, but we probably published less than 1 out of 200 submissions. Compare that with Al forcing Romero to release 2 games in a month, because subscribers were used to such a schedule. Meanwhile, over the course of its truly respectable 18-year tenure as a publisher, Softdisk burned a lot of time and energy dealing with the laggard legion and their constant naysaying while the adopter avant-garde kept pushing. Pleasing all of those people was straight up impossible, and yet Softdisk staff tried anyway. Just like they tried to stay in touch with the users and asked for feedback. Early on, they'd give you a free disk in place of the one you'd send. They even made a simple blue line editor to allow people to write, since for a long while DOS had a horrible text editor. That being said, they never stopped being somewhat dodgy, and even when they started releasing on CDs, something had to go wrong. Every disc I've seen photographed has words obscured like this, which leads me to believe Softdisk saw this month after month after month and said, "Nah, it's okay." Softdisk for Windows had a decent run of 5 years, and when it died in 1999, the world of tech was vastly different than when the company made its first forays. By that time it diversified into online software distribution and internet services, such as network access, hosting, and web development. I had a look at the sites they made and honestly, they seem passable or quite decent, which leads me to believe that maybe web development was Softdisk's new true calling. They folded, however, in 2016, according to C64 Wiki, which references Wikipedia, which cites thin air. So, for all I know, the company may still be alive. Speaking of Wikipedia, this somewhat recognizable photo that appears when people mention Softdisk was made by a certain D. Tobias, perhaps as a last memento, which seems to be the same Dan Tobias from archive.org, whose work helped in the making of this video. Assuming the company is no longer alive, I'm unable to name one key thing that killed them. Shareware, rising demands, rising complexity and cost, pressure from boxed publishers, freeware, and perhaps open source. But I can name one thing that could have helped. Having at least one hard-hitting product that kept evolving. A magnum opossum, if you will. They pushed that screensaver program, but I think it was too little, too late. Softdisk's properties gradually found new homes. The C64-focused Lodestar was sold in 1996 to its editor, Fender Tucker, and privately his wife, Judy Mangum. Seems to me the breadbun people remember Lodestar more than the PC Master Race remembers Big Blue Disc. The complete Apple II library of Softdisk was for a long time available for purchase on CD from a company called Syndicom. The entirety of the rights was purchased by Flat Rock Software that eventually open-sourced the IT Classics, allowing them to join the pantheon occupied by the likes of Doom and Quake. My feelings towards this publication are difficult to describe, so I'll give you an example. In issue 88 I play Bubba's Cavernous Conundrum, a platformer-like, where you can't jump diagonally, and the help screen straight up confirms that this is by design. I lack the evidence to call this BS. The way I see it, the developer had not enough skill or time to implement such a bleeding-edge feature in the year 1994, years after Keen was on the market. Or maybe the guy had a bold artistic idea. The main skill here is avoiding dickish traps that kill you or soft-lock your progress. I rage quit because navigating levels where the design has to work around the lack of diagonal jump is too much for my brittle psyche to handle. In issue 90, Bubba makes a return, now as a cowboy. Still can't jump diagonally, and I rage quit again. And then we have Bubba on a safari, where I get killed by a cloud, and rage quit once more. Bubba is either a frustrating puzzle game using a platformer as a vehicle, or a really shit, slow, underdeveloped platformer. Whatever it is, this person really enjoyed it. Just like the disturbed child mentioned here. Meanwhile, I'd rather dry hump a sack of potatoes than play Bubba again. I want to lay in bed and be given head pats as compensation for all of this. But here's the thing. No matter how much I was tired of the puzzles, quizzes, crosswords, and card games, there constantly seemed to be people who enjoyed them. This stuff must have had an audience, otherwise they'd stop subscribing after the first round of content. There was even a running leaderboard with user-submitted high scores and game completions, which brings me to the audience. I'm trying to be less cynical about this. Probably there were families that were happy with those subscriptions. They couldn't afford or didn't need the pro-grade stuff, so they got themselves this. They didn't see this as Al's shitty shovel. For them, this was a cornucopia where everyone in the family would get something. Maybe they were happy instead of entitled. Maybe grateful even. You know what, person from 1995? I hope your son-in-law did find a job, thanks to Resume Master Deluxe. As corny as it sounds. Despite all of its shortcomings, the company did right by those people. Perhaps there's someone out there for whom those issues were their first exciting forays into computing. Perhaps you're that person. Which is why I refuse to condemn the company. It deserves its non-reputation and non-memory. Its place in the shadows of massively more successful companies. Which brings me back to Al. Masters of Doom made him, in my mind, sound a little boring and soulless. But a soulless biz guy would not have a sticker like this. Al was one of us. Geeks, not furries. Although, who knows at this point? If Softdisk was a coffee shop, the coffee on offer wasn't especially great, and the pastries may have had some dubious ingredients in them, but in the end they were okay enough for long enough. And that's about as long as the brand was remembered. Until the hunger lasted. One, two, three. I am not renewing my sub.